Okay, welcome back to Chapter 8, Lesson 7. I am on page 523 right now, and that's the beginning. We're using benchmark fractions to compare and order. So this is just another strategy to use to compare fractions like what we were doing on Lesson 6, but instead of using those least common multiples, we're going to try a different method that can be a little bit easier depending on your drawing. Okay, so benchmark fractions are common fractions such as a half that are often used to compare and order fractions. So we're going to use the fraction 1/2 as our benchmark through most of this. Okay, a recipe for granola uses 5/8 a cup of raisins and 1/6 a cup of dried cranberries. Is there a greater amount of raisins or cranberries? Okay, so I need the greater amount. And I need to know whether that's raisins or cranberries. Okay, so I'm comparing 5/8 to 1/6. Okay, and instead of drawing my circles, I'm going to use a line graph. And obviously, if it's closer to 0, it's going to be less. And if it's closer to 1, it's going to be greater. Okay, and of course, with my benchmark fraction, my benchmark fraction is 1/2. That's going to be right in the middle of 0 and 1. So I'm going to write 1/2 right in the middle. Okay. Now what they've showed you on the book is 3 different number lines. And they'll give you examples where they've done these for you, and you can use this. They've marked 5/8 on the line, and they've marked 1/6 on the line as well. So you can draw more number lines. The thing here is it can be tricky to keep your sections equal. So if I'm doing 4/8, or I'm sorry, if I'm doing 8ths here, 1/2 is equal to 4/8. So then I'm going to have to get, here's my 0/8. The trick here is to keep my sections equal. So there's half of that and half of each of those. There's half of that and then half of each of those. And there's my 1. So then I've got and then I can see my 5/8. And then if I'm doing the same thing, this is where it gets tricky. I'm going to do 6. And I've still got 1 over here and 0 over here. I've still got my half, which would be 3/6. So now I need to divide this section into 3 parts. So that's where it gets kind of, it's tricky to try and keep these sections because this section, they all should be equal. And again, I have to divide that up. So if you have a way to print things out, you can print out these line plots like this, and then you can compare them this way, and I've got 1/6 here. So if you're looking here, 5/6 is closer to 1, and 1/6 is closer to 0. So if I'm comparing, 5/8 is going to be greater than 1/6. Another thing you can do, because it is hard to make all these spaces equal, what you can think is, okay, if 1/2 is 4/8, and I've got 5/8, I know 5/8 is greater than 4/8, so that 5/8 is going to be on this side. And I know 1/2 is also 3/6, so 1/6 is going to be less than that, 1/6 is going to be over here. I can compare them all basically on one number line by keeping this in mind, what all my equivalent fractions for a half are. So that may be another way to think of this. If you're not confident in your ability to divide these up into sections, or if you're having trouble getting those done, you can just think, what are my equivalent fractions to a half, and how do these fractions relate to that? So that's another way to look at these problems. So using this method to compare the fractions. So that's example number 1. So 5/8 is greater than 1/6. There is a greater amount of raisins in the granola recipe because, again, 5/8 a cup of raisins and 1/6 a cup of dried cranberries. So to write my complete sentence answer, I would write there is a greater amount of raisins in the granola recipe. So that's using a benchmark fraction of a half to compare other fractions. And let's look at example 2. The nice thing I noticed is when they're giving you 3, one of them is always a half. So that's kind of convenient for us. So let me just do this. So list 7/8, 1/2, and 1/3 in order from least to greatest. And if you have a way to print out number lines, that's fabulous. If you don't, I'm going to show you. This time I'm just going to use 1 so I don't have to draw those pictures, and I think it'll give you a better visualization of how to compare these in a slightly simpler way. Okay, so I've got 1/2 in the middle, and I see that I have 7/8. So I was looking at half, how many 8s is equal to a half? Well, half of 8 is 4, so 4/8 is equal to half. Then I've got this sticky one where I've got a third, and half of 3 is 1 1/2. So we don't really have a fraction for a third that is right on this line, but I do know that 1/3 is going to be less than 1/2. So if I were to draw another number line with thirds, and 1 is over here, it would be 1/3, 2/3. Look like that. So 1/3 is going to be less than my 1/2. Oh, my pen is not opening. Okay, so 1/3 is going to be on this side of the half. And then my other number is 7/8, and I know that 4/8 is the same as half. 7/8 is going to be greater than 4/8. Is going to be over here. And since the closer to 1 I am, the greater I am, I have 1/3, 1/2, and 7/8. They're already written in order there by using that number line. You can use a ruler, but with the halves and the fractions, it's kind of confusing to do that. So 3/6. I wonder why they did 3/6 when they've got. Okay, I had to go back and look why they did 3/6, because 3/6 is going to be right here, right at the half. And since you know that's taking it a step more complicated, 2/6 is equal to 1/3, and 3/6 is equal to 1/2. So 2/6 is less than a half. So that's taking it a level of complication farther than I think we really needed to. So if we've got these numbers in order, it says from least to greatest, we're going to have 1/3, 1/2, and 7/8 as it shows here. 1/3 is less than 1/2, which is less than 7/8. And that's how example number 2 is done. Okay, oops. I just gave you the answers. 3/4 is greater than 1/2 because 1/2 is equal to, let me change colors again here. If I'm looking at fourths, 2/4 is right at a half. So 3/4 is going to be greater. 3/6 is equal to 1/2. And 3/4 is going to be greater than that. Okay, so these number lines can help you with all of these. Let's look at the next page. Okay, so they've given you, this is nice because they've given you all of the number lines you're going to need for number 3 and 4. So you're going to find 4/5 on this and 1/3 on this and compare that to the half. And one will be on one side of the half and one will be on the other side of the half. That's the nice thing about all these problems. You can they're all going to be on one side or the other of the half. Okay, so looking at this 4 example, we've got 1/3 and 8/10. And I know that 1/3 is less. If I had 1/3 of a dollar, I would have less than if I had a half of a dollar. So here's my number line with my 0 and my 1 and my half. I know that 1/3 is going to be on this side. And now I'm looking at number 5, by the way. I've got 8/10. Half of 10 would be 5. So if I'm looking at 8/10, 8/10 is going to be on this side. So if I'm comparing 1/3 and 8/10, 1/3 is going to be less than 8/10 because the 1/3 is on the left of the half, the 8/10 is on the right of the half. Okay, so that's how you can use this number line, and you can even use the same one if you don't want to use the space to do all 3 separate. If you have a way to print them out, that can be handy too. So that's what you're doing on page 525, comparing these. At the bottom, you're going to compare 3 instead of just the 2, but again, one of them will always be a half. So that, since you're already using half as your benchmark, it doesn't complicate anything. You're just including this half when you're doing your comparison. That's the only addition on those 11, 12, and 13. Okay. Now let's look at these word problems. We're comparing a half with a quarter. Which fraction is greater? We're comparing 3/4 and a half. On which day did Sarah run farther? So again, we're the greatest number. And again, we're looking at, is there more red fabric or blue fabric? So you're not going to answer which is greater. You're going to answer either with red fabric or blue fabric. Which one is more? Okay, 1/6 of a garden has tomatoes. Fractions in order, least to greatest, 1/6, 1/2, 1/3. So that's similar. You go back and look at what you did 11, 12, 13 for number 17 if you're stuck. Write a fraction that is greater than 1/3 and less than a half. So something that's going to be in between this and this. So think of, maybe you can go to sixths. 1/3 would be 2/6. 1/2 would be 3/6. What's going to be in between those? Nothing is going to be in between those, so you're going to have to go even farther. Maybe 9ths. 1/3 would be 3/9. Okay, find something that is in between 1/3 and 1/2. How to decide if 3/4 is greater than 1/6? Okay, so we're going to use our benchmark of 1/2. 3/4 is going to go on one side of a half, and 1/6 is going to go on the other side of 1/2. So that's going to be how we can use our benchmark fraction of 1/2 to compare these two fractions. Don't forget to read all the steps on the homework, because that's going to help you when you do your homework, comparing these 3. And don't forget to do the back. You're going all the way to 528 with your independent work. Now looking at page 528, I did notice they're doing these comparing from least to greatest, and they give you a half here, and if you look, you don't see one that's a half, but there is one that is equivalent to 1/2 that is here. So you just need to look and figure out which of these 3 is equivalent to 1/2, and then you can still use your benchmark there. Same thing with, there's another problem I saw that did that. But anyway, look for one. If you don't see one that is a half, look for a fraction that is equivalent to a half. And then you're going to compare here 1/4 with 3/6. Zane eats 1/8 of a pizza. Later he eats half of the same pizza. Did he eat more the first or second time? How do I use benchmark fractions? So just put in word form what you've been doing in math with all these problems that you've done. Which fraction is not greater than 2/5? So figure out which one of these, if you were looking for one that is greater, which one is not greater. All the other ones will be greater than that. Okay, so 528 is the end of what you're doing. And thank you for all your hard work.